The rain fell hard on Lagos that night. A pregnant woman stood alone on the wet street, her bags scattered around her feet. Her name was Elena. No, wait. Her name was Vivian. And the man standing in the doorway, arms crossed, face cold, was her husband, Marcus. He had just thrown her out. Behind Marcus, inside the warm house, two women watched. His mother. And his mistress. Both of them smiling. What kind of man throws his pregnant wife into the rain? Her name was Vivian Cole, and she had never asked for much. She had not asked for a big house, expensive clothes, or a life full of noise and attention. She had asked only for one thing, to be loved for who she was, not for what she came from. And for 3 years she had believed Marcus was giving her exactly that. Marcus Harris was a confident man. Good-looking, well-dressed, and always sure of himself. When he had met Vivian at a quiet cafe in Lagos, he had thought she was just a gentle, simple woman. No big connections. No family money. Just a kind heart and a soft voice. He had married her believing that. He had no idea how wrong he was. Vivian had grown up in Port Harcourt, in a home most people only dreamed about. Her father, Chief Raymond Okafor, was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in Nigeria. A trillionaire. A man whose name alone opened doors and closed businesses. But Vivian had never wanted that life to define her. So she had kept it quiet. She had worn simple clothes, carried herself with humility, and moved to Lagos to find love on her own terms, without her father's shadow following her everywhere. For a while it had worked. She and Marcus had built something together. Or at least she had thought they were building something. She cooked, she cared, she stayed loyal even when she noticed the signs. The late nights, the strange phone calls, the coldness that crept into Marcus's eyes like a slow fog. She had stayed. Because she was carrying his child. But staying had cost her more than she knew. Marcus's mother, Mrs. Margaret Harris, had never liked Vivian. From the very first day they met, Margaret had looked at her daughter-in-law like something that did not belong. Too quiet, too plain, too ordinary. Margaret wanted Marcus with someone loud and connected, someone who could boost the family name. And then there was Sandra, Marcus's mistress, a woman who had been in the picture long before Vivian suspected. Sandra was sharp, bold, and she wanted Marcus's full attention. She had been patient. But patience had run out. One evening, Vivian came home from a short walk to find Sandra sitting in her sitting room, relaxed and comfortable, with Margaret nodding beside her like nothing was wrong. Vivian stopped at the door. She looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at her, and in that one long second she saw it. He had already made his decision. Long before tonight, he had already chosen. He stood up. He pointed at her bags already packed by the door. "You need to leave," he said simply. Vivian placed one hand on her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant. Rain already beginning to fall outside. "Marcus," she started. "I said leave, Vivian." She did not scream. She did not beg. She picked up her bags slowly, walked through the door and stepped into the rain. Marcus watched her go, then closed the door. He had no idea he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. But what would happen when the man he worked for, the man who signed his paycheck every single month, turned out to be Vivian's father? Vivian did not go far that night. She stood under the small roof of a shop across the street, her bags at her feet, the rain drumming loudly on the zinc above her head. Her hand rested on her belly. The baby moved, a small gentle kick, and Vivian closed her eyes. She was not crying. Not yet. She pulled out her phone and stared at the screen for a long moment. There was one number she had avoided calling for 3 years. One person she had kept her struggles hidden from, not out of shame but out of pride. She had wanted to prove she could stand on her own. But tonight, standing in the rain with nowhere to go, that pride felt very small. She did not call the number. Not yet. She put the phone back in her pocket and flagged down a taxi. She checked into a small, quiet hotel in Lagos Island that night. Nothing fancy. She sat on the edge of the bed, her wet clothes still clinging to her skin, and finally allowed one tear to fall. Just one. Then she wiped it away and straightened her back. She thought about the 3 years she had given Marcus. The meals she had cooked at midnight when he came home late without explanation. The questions she had swallowed. The loneliness she had dressed up as patience. She had told herself it was love. Now she was not so sure what it had been. The next morning she called her father. Chief Raymond Okafor picked up on the second ring. His voice was calm, the way it always was, steady and deep, like a man who had weathered every kind of storm and was still standing. "Vivian," he said. Just her name. But the way he said it told her he already knew something was wrong. She kept her voice flat and clean. "I need a place to stay, Daddy." Just for a while. A short silence. Then, I'll send a car. He did not ask questions over the phone. That was her father's way. He gathered facts quietly, like a man building a case, and when he finally spoke, every word counted. By noon, a sleek black SUV was parked outside her hotel. 2 of her father's men carried her bags without a word. Vivian climbed in slowly, careful with her belly, and watched Lagos blur past the tinted windows. She felt something shift inside her chest, not relief exactly. More like the quiet before a very large storm. Back at the house in Lekki Phase 1, Chief Raymond met her at the door. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with silver at his temples and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He looked at his daughter, her tired face, her swollen belly, the faint shadows under her eyes, and his jaw tightened. He pulled her into a hug without a word. Vivian pressed her face against his shoulder and breathed. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. So she did. She told him about the 3 years. About Margaret's cold looks and cutting words. About Sandra appearing in her home like she owned it. About Marcus pointing at her packed bags and telling her to leave, 7 months pregnant in the rain, without a second thought. Chief Raymond listened without moving. Without blinking. His hands were folded in his lap, perfectly still. When she finished, the room was silent for a long time. Then he stood up, adjusted his agbada, and walked toward his study. "Rest," he told Vivian quietly. "I will handle this." And the way he said those 4 words made the air in the room feel different. What exactly did Chief Raymond Okafor plan to do? And did Marcus Harris have any idea that the man signing his paycheck every month was the same man whose pregnant daughter he had just thrown into the rain? Marcus Harris was in a good mood that Monday morning. He straightened his tie in the mirror, sprayed his cologne, and smiled at his reflection. Sandra had cooked breakfast. His mother was humming in the kitchen. The house felt lighter, easier, the way he had always wanted it to feel. He had not thought about Vivian once since closing that door. He drove to work with the radio on, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. He worked as a senior manager at Okafor Group of Companies, one of the largest and most respected conglomerates in Nigeria. The pay was excellent. The office was on the 14th floor of a glass building on Victoria Island. Marcus had always felt proud walking through those doors. He felt proud that morning too. He had no idea it would be the last time. The office was normal at first. Emails. A team meeting. Coffee. His assistant reminded him about a quarterly report due by Friday. Everything was routine, comfortable, familiar. Then at exactly 11 o'clock his phone buzzed. A message from HR. "Please report to the executive boardroom immediately. Mr. Okafor will be present." Marcus frowned at the screen. Mr. Okafor never came to the Lagos office unannounced. The man ran his empire from Port Harcourt, communicating mostly through board members and senior directors. In the 4 years Marcus had worked at the company, he had only seen Chief Raymond Okafor twice, both times at large formal events. Something felt strange. But Marcus smoothed his jacket, picked up his notepad, and told himself it was probably a routine executive review. He took the elevator to the top floor. The boardroom was quiet when he entered. Too quiet. 3 senior directors sat along one side of the long table, their faces unreadable. A company lawyer sat at the end, a thick folder open in front of him. And at the head of the table sat Chief Raymond Okafor. Marcus had forgotten how commanding the man was in person. He filled the room without trying, broad, still, and watching Marcus with eyes that gave nothing away. "Sit down, Mr. Harris," Chief Raymond said. Marcus sat. "Do you know why you are here?" the chief asked. Marcus shook his head carefully. "No, sir. I assumed it was a performance review." "It is not." Chief Raymond opened a thin folder in front of him and slid a photograph across the table. Marcus looked down. It was a photo of Vivian. Standing outside a hotel in wet clothes, one hand on her pregnant belly, bags at her feet. Taken the night he had thrown her out. The blood drained slowly from Marcus's face. "That woman," Chief Raymond said, his voice perfectly calm, "is my daughter. My only daughter. And that child she is carrying, that is my grandchild." The room was so silent Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. "I have spent the last 48 hours reviewing your employment history, your finances, and your personal conduct." The chief leaned forward slightly. "What I found was very interesting, Mr. Harris." The lawyer opened the thick folder and began to read. Marcus's salary. His car, company-owned. His apartment in Lekki, leased under an Okafor Group subsidiary. His children's school fees, paid through a company welfare package Marcus had quietly applied for 2 years ago. Everything. Every single thing Marcus had used to look successful and comfortable had been connected, in one way or another, to Chief Raymond Okafor's money. The same man whose pregnant daughter he had thrown into the rain. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Sir, I can explain." "You are terminated, Mr. Harris," Chief Raymond said simply. "Effective today. Security will escort you out. The company car will be collected this evening. The apartment lease will be cancelled within the week." He closed his folder. "And I suggest," the chief added quietly, "that you inform your mother and your companion to begin making their own arrangements." Marcus walked out of that boardroom on shaking legs, but the worst part of his humiliation had not even begun yet. Marcus Harris was in a good mood that Monday morning. He straightened his tie in the mirror, sprayed his cologne, and smiled at his reflection. Sandra had cooked breakfast. His mother was humming in the kitchen. The house felt lighter, easier, the way he had always wanted it to feel. He had not thought about Vivian once since closing that door. He drove to work with the radio on, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. He worked as a senior manager at Okafor Group of Companies, one of the largest and most respected conglomerates in Nigeria. The pay was excellent. The office was on the 14th floor of a glass building on Victoria Island. Marcus had always felt proud walking through those doors. He felt proud that morning too. He had no idea it would be the last time. The office was normal at first. Emails. A team meeting. Coffee. His assistant reminded him about a quarterly report due by Friday. Everything was routine, comfortable, familiar. Then at exactly 11 o'clock his phone buzzed. A message from HR. "Please report to the executive boardroom immediately. Mr. Okafor will be present." Marcus frowned at the screen. Mr. Okafor never came to the Lagos office unannounced. The man ran his empire from Port Harcourt, communicating mostly through board members and senior directors. In the 4 years Marcus had worked at the company, he had only seen Chief Raymond Okafor twice, both times at large formal events. Something felt strange. But Marcus smoothed his jacket, picked up his notepad, and told himself it was probably a routine executive review. He took the elevator to the top floor. The boardroom was quiet when he entered. Too quiet. 3 senior directors sat along one side of the long table, their faces unreadable. A company lawyer sat at the end, a thick folder open in front of him. And at the head of the table sat Chief Raymond Okafor. Marcus had forgotten how commanding the man was in person. He filled the room without trying, broad, still, and watching Marcus with eyes that gave nothing away. "Sit down, Mr. Harris," Chief Raymond said. Marcus sat. "Do you know why you are here?" the chief asked. Marcus shook his head carefully. "No, sir. I assumed it was a performance review." "It is not." Chief Raymond opened a thin folder in front of him and slid a photograph across the table. Marcus looked down. It was a photo of Vivian. Standing outside a hotel in wet clothes, one hand on her pregnant belly, bags at her feet. Taken the night he had thrown her out. The blood drained slowly from Marcus's face. "That woman," Chief Raymond said, his voice perfectly calm, "is my daughter. My only daughter. And that child she is carrying, that is my grandchild." The room was so silent Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. "I have spent the last 48 hours reviewing your employment history, your finances, and your personal conduct." The chief leaned forward slightly. "What I found was very interesting, Mr. Harris." The lawyer opened the thick folder and began to read. Marcus's salary. His car, company-owned. His apartment in Lekki, leased under an Okafor Group subsidiary. His children's school fees, paid through a company welfare package Marcus had quietly applied for 2 years ago. Everything. Every single thing Marcus had used to look successful and comfortable had been connected, in one way or another, to Chief Raymond Okafor's money. The same man whose pregnant daughter he had thrown into the rain. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Sir, I can explain." "You are terminated, Mr. Harris," Chief Raymond said simply. "Effective today. Security will escort you out. The company car will be collected this evening. The apartment lease will be cancelled within the week." He closed his folder. "And I suggest," the chief added quietly, "that you inform your mother and your companion to begin making their own arrangements." Marcus walked out of that boardroom on shaking legs, but the worst part of his humiliation had not even begun yet. Marcus drove home in silence. His hands were tight on the steering wheel, the same steering wheel he would have to surrender by evening. His mind was racing, jumping from one thought to the next, trying to find some angle, some solution, some way out of the hole that had opened beneath his feet. He found nothing. By the time he parked outside the house, his phone had already rung 4 times. 2 calls from colleagues who had heard the news. 1 from his bank. A loan he had taken against his salary now had no salary to stand on. And 1 from the property management company, confirming that the lease on his Lekki apartment had been flagged for early termination. 4 phone calls. 40 minutes. His entire life was already coming apart. He walked inside to find his mother, Margaret, sitting in the sitting room watching a program on television. Sandra was in the kitchen, humming to herself. The house smelled like fried plantain and palm oil. Everything looked exactly the same as when he had left that morning. But nothing was the same. "Mummy," Marcus said. His voice came out strange, flat and hollow. Margaret looked up. She saw his face and muted the television immediately. He told them everything. He told them about the boardroom. About Chief Raymond sitting at the head of the table like a judge. About the photograph of Vivian in the rain. About the lawyer reading out every benefit, every package, every comfort that had quietly been funded by a man Marcus had never connected to his own wife. When he finished, the kitchen had gone completely silent. Sandra stood in the doorway, her humming stopped, her face pale. Margaret sat very still. Then Margaret did what Margaret always did when she was cornered. She got loud. "How was anyone supposed to know?" she snapped, standing up. The girl never said a word. She walked around this house like a church mouse. No style, no connection, no. "Mummy, stop," Marcus said quietly. But Margaret was not stopping. She deceived us. If she had simply told us who her father was from the beginning. "She told us nothing," Marcus cut in, his voice rising now, "because she wanted to be loved without all of that. And instead of love, we threw her into the rain." The room went quiet again. Sandra looked at the floor. Margaret pressed her lips together. Marcus sat down heavily on the sofa and dropped his head into his hands. For the first time since Sunday night, the reality of what they had done settled fully into the room. Not just the professional consequences. Not just the lost apartment and the cancelled car and the terminated contract. The human part of it. A pregnant woman. Standing in the rain. Alone. 3 days later, the eviction notice arrived. Printed, official, and final. Margaret read it twice, her hands shaking. Sandra packed a bag that same afternoon and left without much conversation. She had a life to return to, and that life did not include a sinking ship. Margaret turned to Marcus, her voice smaller now than he had ever heard it. "What do we do?" Marcus looked at his mother, this woman who had encouraged every cold decision, who had smiled when Vivian walked out into the rain, and felt something heavy and sad settle in his chest. "We find somewhere else to live," he said quietly. "And we live with what we did." But across Lagos, in a clean and comfortable guest suite inside Chief Raymond's Lekki mansion, Vivian was sitting by the window watching the evening sky turn orange and pink above the lagoon. She was not celebrating. She was not angry. She was just tired. Her belly was full and round. The baby kicked softly. She pressed her hand against the movement and closed her eyes. She had spent 3 years making herself small so that Marcus could feel big. 3 years swallowing her identity, her background, her voice, all for a love that had turned out to be made of paper. Her father knocked and entered quietly. He set a tray of food on the table beside her and sat in the chair across from her without speaking. That was the thing about Chief Raymond. He never filled silence with empty words. After a moment, Vivian spoke. "I want to end the marriage, Daddy." Chief Raymond nodded slowly. "I know. I don't want to fight. No court drama. No noise." She looked at him steadily. "I just want it to be over." Her father looked at her for a long moment, this daughter who had inherited his quiet strength and her mother's gentle heart, and nodded again. The marriage was ending. But what Vivian did not yet know was that the next chapter of her life, the one that would finally give her the love she had always deserved, was already waiting for her in the most unexpected place. 6 months later, Vivian was a different woman. Not louder. Not harder. Just cleaner, the way a room feels after all the old, heavy furniture has been moved out and fresh air has finally been let in. She had given birth to a healthy baby boy. She had named him Tobias. And she had quietly, legally ended her marriage to Marcus Harris without a single headline or courtroom drama. She had walked away with her son and her peace. She did not return to Port Harcourt and her father's mansion. That had never been her way. Instead, she rented a small, comfortable flat in Ibadan under a different name. Vivian Cole became Victoria Adeyemi in that quiet city, and nobody asked questions. She liked the anonymity. She liked the ordinary rhythm of it. Waking up early, feeding Tobias, taking slow walks in the morning before the heat came. She needed simple. After everything, simple felt like medicine. 3 months after settling in Ibadan, she took a part-time job at a small bookstore on a quiet street not far from her flat. The owner was an elderly woman who asked for nothing except that Vivian arrive on time and handle the books with care. Both of those things Vivian could do easily. The bookstore became her sanctuary. The smell of paper. The soft sound of pages turning. The occasional customer who came in looking lost and left looking slightly less so. She was healing slowly and quietly the way deep wounds do. It was at the bookstore that she met Nathan. He came in on a Tuesday afternoon with a little girl of about 5 years old holding his hand. The child went straight for the picture book section and began pulling titles off the shelf with great enthusiasm. Nathan followed behind her, picking up everything she dropped, looking slightly exhausted but completely devoted. Vivian watched from behind the counter and smiled without meaning to. He came to the counter with a small pile of books, all children's titles, and paid without much conversation. But as he was leaving, his daughter knocked over a display stand near the door. Books scattered everywhere. Nathan crouched down immediately, gathering them. Vivian came around the counter to help. They reached for the same book at the same moment, looked up, and found themselves face to face at close range. "Sorry," he said quickly, pulling back. "It's fine," she said and meant it. His name was Nathan Adebayo. She learned that slowly over the following weeks because he came back every Tuesday without fail, always with his daughter, Chloe, always buying more books than one small girl could possibly read in 7 days. He was a single father. His wife had passed away 2 years earlier after a brief illness. He was raising Chloe alone while running a small but steady architecture firm in Ibadan. He was quiet, careful with his words, and genuinely kind in the small ways that matter most. Vivian noticed the kindness before she noticed anything else. The way he always greeted the elderly bookstore owner by name and asked how her knee was healing. The way he let Chloe choose every single book without rushing her. The way he once stayed behind after closing time to help Vivian lift a heavy box of new stock because he had simply noticed she was struggling. No announcement. No performance. Just help offered quietly. It reminded her of something she had almost forgotten. That kindness was not supposed to be a special occasion. It was supposed to be the everyday. Tobias and Chloe met on one of those Tuesdays and immediately became inseparable in the way only small children can. Loudly, completely, and without any of the complications adults bring to new relationships. Nathan laughed watching them. It was the first time Vivian had heard him laugh fully without holding back. She found herself thinking about that laugh later that evening, while Tobias slept and the flat was quiet. She told herself it meant nothing. But the heart, once it begins to wake up again after a long sleep, is very difficult to argue with. Weeks turned into months. Tuesdays became the best day of her week. Their conversations moved from books to life to loss to hope. Slowly, carefully, the way two people move toward each other when they have both been hurt before and are no longer willing to be careless with their own hearts. Nathan never pushed. He never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. He simply showed up Tuesday after Tuesday, steady and warm and real. And Vivian, who had once made herself invisible to be loved, was beginning to wonder if she had finally found someone who could see her clearly. But she was still hiding the most important truth about herself. And sooner or later, Nathan would have to know exactly who Victoria Adeyemi really was. The evening Vivian told Nathan the truth began like any other. They were sitting on the small veranda outside her flat, the children already asleep inside. Ibadan was cooling down after a long hot day, and the sky above the rooftops was full of quiet stars. Nathan had brought groundnuts in a paper bag the way he sometimes did, and they were talking about nothing important. A book she had recommended, a building project he was finishing. It was peaceful. Easy. The kind of evening she had once thought she would never have again. Then Nathan said something that changed the direction of everything. He had been looking at the sky, relaxed and unhurried, when he turned to her and said quietly, "I want to be honest with you, Victoria. I think I love you. And before this goes any further, I need to know if you're ready for that." Vivian looked at him for a long moment. Her chest was full of warmth and fear and the particular ache of someone standing at a door they have been afraid to open. She said, "There's something I need to tell you first." She told him everything. Her real name. Her father. The trillionaire whose name moved markets and filled newspapers. The mansion in Port Harcourt. The marriage she had hidden from to find real love. The husband who had thrown her into the rain without knowing who she was. She told him all of it, watching his face the whole time. Nathan listened without interrupting. His expression shifted. Surprise, then stillness, then something she could not immediately name. When she finished, the veranda was very quiet. He stood up and walked to the railing. He stood there with his back to her for what felt like a long time, looking out at the dark Abaddon street below. Vivian sat very still. Her hands were folded in her lap. She had been here before, waiting for a man to decide what she was worth. She had promised herself she would not beg this time either. She waited. When Nathan turned around, his eyes were steady. "I'm not going to lie to you," he said. That was a lot to hear. "And yes, for one moment I felt the ground shift under me." He paused. "But then I thought about every Tuesday. Every conversation. The way you are with Tobias and with Chloe. The way you laughed at that terrible joke I made about architecture last month." He came back and sat down beside her. "I didn't fall in love with Chief Raymond's daughter," he said simply. "I fell in love with the woman who works in a bookstore and smells like old paper and always has a book recommendation ready before I finish asking." Vivian felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been tied tight for a very long time. She did not cry. She just breathed. "I'm still the same person," she said quietly. "I know," Nathan said. "That's exactly why I'm still sitting here." They married 6 months later in Port Harcourt. It was a warm, beautiful ceremony, not the loud, excessive kind that money can easily buy, but the honest, full kind that love builds slowly. Chief Raymond Okafor stood at his daughter's side with eyes that were steady and proud and just slightly wet at the corners. Chloe wore a yellow dress and held Tobias's hand through the entire ceremony, both of them serious and important in the way children are when they know something big is happening. Nathan built them a home in Ibadan, designed with his own hands, every room thoughtful and warm. Vivian kept the bookstore job for another year, not because she needed it, but because it had healed her and she was not ready to let it go. When she finally did leave, she used a portion of her inheritance to start a foundation, a charity that supported women and children in difficult situations, women who had been discarded and forgotten, women who needed someone to remind them that their story was not finished. She named the foundation after the thing that had saved her. She called it Quiet Strength. People who met Vivian in those years often said the same thing, that there was something about her that was hard to explain. A kind of peace that did not come from having everything, but from having lost enough to know what truly mattered. She had been humiliated. She had stood in the rain, pregnant and alone, while the man she loved closed a door in her face. She had rebuilt herself in a quiet city under a borrowed name, one Tuesday at a time. And she had come out the other side not bitter, not broken, but clear. She knew now that betrayal, as painful as it was, had been a gift in disguise. It had stripped away everything false and left only what was real. It had taught her the difference between a man who loved her name and a man who loved her heart. Every evening, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, she and Nathan would sit together. Sometimes talking, sometimes reading, sometimes just breathing the same air in comfortable silence. Anne Vivian Cole, once thrown into the rain like she was nothing, would look at the life she had built and feel something she had almost stopped believing in. She felt completely, quietly, and permanently at home. We've come to the end of today's story. I hope it touched your heart. Thanks for watching and staying with us till the end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. See you in the next one. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from?